We're three friends from the UK, George, Stephen and Ian, brought together essentially through a love of music. We've done several trips to Nashville and Memphis already over the past few years, the last back in 2017. For this one though, we planned a longer, more extensive trip through blues and Americana country, so we decided to capture some of our adventures and musical highlights along the way this time. With this in mind, the Power Trio set off again on a 3-week, 6-state tour of the South.
Our first stop along the way is Nashville, Tennessee. Famous as the home of country music, the Ryman Theatre, Grand Ole Opry and Broadway, where you can see live music in a wide variety of honky-tonks, 365 days a year. A great introduction to Nashville is to go on the Jug Sisters Nash Trash Bus Tour, a city institution since 1997. It is a comedy show on wheels, taking an alternative view of Music City. After our tour, we caught up with sisters Sherry Lynn and Brenda King.
We're just three middle-aged guys on a bit of a road trip around the States. We love our music, and we thought we'd like to capture some highlights and lowlights on a trip. So this is one of the lowlights. So and we've been here. Robin, our friend Robin, who's from Nashville, had
she's
got
awesome.
us on this trip.
We met her
tour,
in women's prison.
That was 2 years ago, and we loved it so much we thought we'd come back again.
I know.
So we've seen a lot of change in Nashville in the 3 years that we've been here. So how's it changed for you guys?
For us, we're still doing our show,
Right.
which thank the Lord that hasn't changed too much, although it changes every day with certain people
Right.
on the bus as we get to know them and we sort of lend our. What's my point?
We are still relevant. 23 years.
Absolutely.
How many long have we done this?
So
23 years, we're still
200
relevant.
years.
And we still book the bus. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So is Nashville changing? Do you have to change the script, or does it just evolve?
No,
or
not really.
have you been saying the same old shit for 20 years?
We've been doing
Same old shit. Same old shit.
We've been doing the same old shit,
Oh,
but
great.
it does change. It evolves.
of course.
And of course, things for us have changed a lot. There's a lot more traffic in Nashville. So our tours have become a lot longer because there's so much traffic to get around.
Yeah.
And also, there's a lot of other tour companies in town now offering weird stuff like we've been doing.
Yeah, and that's why we also have now 3 different tours that are offered on this bus.
On your bus.
That not only her and I are the, we own the company.
We're the big stars.
But we've hired.
We're the draw, as they say in showbiz.
But if we're sold out, which we're always sold out.
Of course.
They can go to our website and they can look at the 3 other options and taking those tours. And they're very different, and so that's
because we're not everybody's cup of tea.
Oh, that's great. So do you kind of build the show around whoever walks on the bus?
That's exactly
That's
right.
what I was trying to say earlier, and I got tongue-tied.
So how long have you gals been doing this?
Couple 2-3 days.
That's the same as us.
Well, we didn't like to see.
This is our final dress rehearsal. No, 20.
We're in our 23rd year right now.
September 1st. It'll be
Isn't that
23.
crazy? It seems like yesterday.
We were children when we started.
Of course. So have you always been in showbiz?
Yeah.
We've always been singers and actresses. We've always been sisters.
We are really sisters.
Yeah, we
There
really
really
are.
are 6 kids in our family. We were really born in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Really 6
Yes.
years? Right,
Yeah,
right.
and she's
So you
really.
didn't make that shit up?
No, we didn't
We
make
didn't
that
make
shit
that
up. I know. Yeah.
And when you mentioned that, I can't remember her name, but you mentioned you're the famous country singer on. Do they mind? Do you? I would say do you take the piss out of them, or do they mind, or do you?
I think they
Do they mind that we
They
make fun of them? Well, and because you were on the bus, we don't say anything bad.
Oh, you don't hold back. No, but you don't hold back.
But we don't hold back. But it's all stuff that's already out there, and if you can't, my thing is because we always make fun of ourselves on the tour.
I know that.
And if you can't make fun of, if you can't laugh at yourself,
absolutely.
Like Dolly Parton is the best of making fun of herself.
Yeah.
And the way she looks and her huge tits and everything.
Yeah.
She's so.
We're kind of like the poor man's Dolly Parton.
We think you're great.
Self-deprecating humor is the best, and we're good at that. And we always, things are very tongue in cheek and very,
So have you ever had anyone that 5 minutes
Yes.
into the show, 5 minutes into the show, they think, shit, I'm on the wrong bus?
Yeah.
And,
We used to, but very rarely now.
Yeah, because we
People-
kind of got a reputation now.
People
so.
know what they're getting into.
Yeah.
And we have
But
so
we've
many
had a few people that
Yeah.
just at during
the break.
the break. One lady came up during the break, and I was all by myself by the
Years
bus.
ago.
This not too long ago. She came up to me and she said, "Where's the bus back to whatever?" And I said, "Well, there's a bus stop here." She goes, "This is disgusting. This is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life."
Like, well,
She said, "I don't know how your girls sleep at night."
We were
And
like,
I said, "Well, ma'am, pretty well."
Yeah, pretty well.
And I said, "I'm sorry you don't like it. We're not everybody's cup of tea." She goes, "You're not my cup of tea." It was so divisive. Well, actually, probably not. It's the country's been divided for a while.
Yes.
Your
But you
guys
know
are
what?
catching up
Oh,
too. let me
absolutely.
tell
And
you.
that's
You're
my
not far
problem.
behind.
If people get their head out of their ass and just make fun of themselves,
Yeah.
and we make fun of the left, the right, the Republicans, Democrats. But
I hate everybody except for people who think like me.
So who's going?
But you know what? That's if people are, and if they don't read our website, they don't look at our reviews, if they don't look at YouTube and find out what they're in for, they buy a $40 ticket on something
Sure.
they know nothing about.
Absolutely.
Because and most.
Who's going to win the next U.S. presidential election?
Oh God,
Well, from
I'm hoping for.
you're really. This is something that we feel pretty
I'm
strongly
hoping for Dolly.
about.
I'm voting for Dolly Parton.
Nashville is now one of America's fastest growing cities. During our stay, we had met jobbing musicians who complained that the old music venues were being gentrified out of existence, and property developers who smiled knowingly and then bought us a round of drinks. Next, we caught up with an old friend, singer-songwriter Shane Douglas, a veteran of the Nashville music scene. We wanted to continue to explore with Shane how Nashville was changing.
It's a great pleasure to see you again, my friend.
Great pleasure to see
We,
you.
in fact, I think we were back in Nashville on a middle-aged man road trip. We've been 3 weeks around the southern states. And this is particularly relevant because I think you and I met about 5 years ago when you were playing in the Bourbon Street Blues and Boogie Bar. And in fact, you asked for any requests, and we had you played a few blues songs. And then you said, I'm going to play one of my own songs, and I think it was called a $40 gig and a $50 tab.
Yep.
And you looked out to the audience and you said, you picked me out, and you said, I think you've had plenty of these in your time, sir. So I thought, I like this guy. So it's lovely to actually talk to you again. So could you just tell us about how the music scene has changed in these last 5 years?
It's just exploded. It's just gone from. It's always been worldwide, but it just seems like so many people are moving here from all over now.
Okay.
And I think I saw on the news something like 80 people every day are moving here.
Wow.
That's a lot of people. But it's great. I mean, there's music everywhere, and
Yeah.
I still think there's something for everybody here. It is
Yeah.
Music City. It's not just country. It's blues, rock and roll, bluegrass.
And
There's
do all the
kinds of
blues
stuff
artists
here.
come up from Texas to record? A lot of blues artists
Yeah,
come
they
up from
do.
Texas to record
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we've actually seen quite a bit of blues since we've been here. And of course we saw
Pretty
you.
good blues scene here, yeah.
So just while I mentioned that song, any chance you could just give us a few bars of it, if you don't mind?
Sure. Now you talk about paying your due. I gotta know you're running a tab. Tell me how much I owe. I can't afford the union. Ain't gonna pay to prove I can play the blues. I keep on toting this guitar and walking the slab for a $40 gig and a $50 tab. They say you're gonna play here, you better have more in the band. You tone it down and don't you get out of hand. Hey, so play some Skinner, none of that crap you wrote. I know the lower Broadway is full of scabs for a $40 gig and a $50 tab. One more? You go to the bridge.
All right.
I've been hired, fired, and tired. I might get drunk again. You know I always wind up right back here. Yeah, where it all began. Well, if I knew another way, I'd sure take it. Takes a lot more than a cowboy had to help me fake it. Pass the tip jar and buy the band another round or two. I drank, man, too many beers, fighting the flab for a $40 $40 gig and a $50 tab. Look, Mom, I made it. Keep on tugging this guitar, I guess it ain't so bad. Got a $40 gig and a $50 tab.
Oh, Shane.
Thank you.
That was it. Thank you.
From Nashville, Tennessee, we headed south through Alabama towards Jackson, Mississippi. En route, we stopped off at some great attractions, including Tupelo, the birthplace of Elvis, and at the legendary Muscle Shoals Sound Studio. Originally working together at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, the world-renowned rhythm section, also known as the Swampers, decided to leave Fame and open up their own studio at 3614 Jackson Highway. The studio gave rise to a distinctive sound in the 60s and 70s. Many influential artists recorded there, from Aretha Franklin to the Rolling Stones. At the studio's visitors centre, we caught up with Terrell Benton, who is one of the dedicated volunteers keeping the music alive.
Right, Terrell, thanks very much for showing us
Absolutely.
around the studio. It's we're just making a short blog film of our travel. We're on a music trip, and we had to come to this iconic venue. So, do you have any interesting tales that you can
Well,
share with us?
well, this little building is where legends walked. So there's about 9 million stories,
Yeah.
and I think about we had just discussed the great session player Eddie Hinton, and Eddie had grown up in Tuscaloosa. He was born in Florida, and he made his way up to Muscle Shoals in the mid '60s, and he started working and writing at a little studio in town, and ended up going over to Fame, and Swampers brought him here with them when they moved over here in 1969. Eddie was maybe the most talented person to ever walk in this building.
Right, wow.
Singer,
That's saying
songwriter.
something.
He, as a songwriter, co-wrote hits for Dusty Springfield, Bobby Womack, Percy Sledge, Tony Joe White. The Quentin Tarantino movie currently out has a song by the Box Tops called Choo Choo Train,
Right.
and Eddie Hinton wrote that tune. That kid would open his mouth to sing, and he sounded like Otis Redding. It was stunning. It would knock you off your feet.
Yeah.
I asked Eddie one time, I said, Eddie, everyone says that you sound like Otis. And he said, I wish I could sing like the greatest singer that ever lived. I said, who's that? He said, Mavis Staples. Eddie had a tough go at life. He was actually schizophrenic, ended up homeless for a while. He passed away in 1995. He was 51 years old, but 2 years ago they inducted him into the Alabama Music Hall of Fame, and one of the people that helped induct him was a guy that he went to high school with in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Chuck Level, keyboard player for the Allman Brothers and the Rolling Stones.
And the Stones, obviously the Stones recorded here
Right,
as well.
right.
And how did they cope with this being a dry state?
Well, I believe that one of the gentlemen that worked here would take the money and go to the appropriate bootlegger and find their poison of choice. I always laughed. Mick Jagger at one point said, I don't remember us drinking and drugging when we were in Muscle Shoals Sound. Well, you can watch go to YouTube, watch the Rolling Stones at Muscle Shoals Sound.
Right.
And I believe you can see a different tale
Yeah.
being told there behind the control board. But they came here with no engineer, and Jimmy Johnson of the Swampers had 12 hours notice. And Jimmy never met a challenge he did not hit head on. He said,
Yeah.
what are you worried about? I got
Yeah.
it.
Incredible.
They did not have the proper visas required to record in America when they came.
Right.
And, of course, they had to kind of keep it on the down low and hide it. And when they first got here, Mick was not pleased, I believe, with the lack of alcohol. But Keith and Charlie were the ones that were absolutely in love with this building.
Yeah.
And came in for 3 days, December 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of 1969.
Yep.
First night they recorded You Gotta Move. Second night, Brown Sugar. And the third night, Wild Horses.
Oh, here.
All here in this little building. Yep. Took them 13 and a half hours to cut Wild Horses.
leaving Muscle Shoals, we continued south to Jackson, Mississippi. At Jackson, we headed downtown to the famous music venue Hal and Mal's. There we attended the Mississippi Blues Society Monday Night Jam and met with Hal and Mal's current owner Brandy, the daughter of Hal White.
So we're just interested in this venue because it seems quite an iconic venue. So how did it all
All
come
right,
about?
so we're 35 years old. My dad, Hal, and my uncle Malcolm, they're brothers. My dad, being the older brother, always had a vision of having an establishment together.
Right.
Growing up, they learned at an early age to cook from their aunts. Their
Right.
mother passed very young, and so their father was a junior college football coach.
Okay.
And
Wow.
then he became the president of the junior colleges, and they learned from their aunts the Southern cuisine
Okay.
of gumbo, red beans and rice, all of those things. So those things were staples in
Okay.
in our home. So growing up, they kind of always were close in proximity.
Yep.
Dad cut his teeth in New Orleans at the Bourbon Orleans, learning the Cajun Creole style cooking. My Uncle Malcolm was always into the promotion aspect, the music. Even when they were at junior college in Booneville, they were bringing,
Right.
Uncle Malcolm was bringing music that at that time you wouldn't hear or wouldn't have been approved,
Right, okay.
right?
Yep.
But they constantly were, pushing the envelope to make sure that everyone came together and had a really good time.
Mississippi is integral to the civil rights movement, and Jackson hosts the fantastic Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. The museum, amongst many other things, highlights the role music has played in the civil rights movement. We explored this theme further with Charles Hooker, one of the museum's guides.
Charles, it's lovely to meet you. Nice to meet you, sir.
Thank you.
And
Lovely to meet
we're
you
just,
all.
it's George, Steve, and myself.
Pretty glad.
We're just on a middle-aged man road trip. We're very interested in our music, and we wanted to come to the south. So we wanted to try and talk to some interesting people like yourself. Obviously, there's a lot of history here in Jackson with the civil rights movement. So we wanted to just ask you a few questions about, in particular, we're interested in music, in blues music, but is there a connection between the civil rights
Absolutely.
movement and the development of essentially black blues
Very
music?
much. Yeah, there, and I have a resource. I may have to look it up and email it to you. But we had a program here at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum a few months ago that was a splendid program that traced the history from African music up through the field hands working,
Yep.
which developed into blues, and blues, I think, developed into gospel.
Yep.
And it continued. Blues continued, but gospel came off of that, and then somewhere between those two, another river took off called jazz.
Yep.
And so they're all related.
Yep.
But during the some gospel, blues, and jazz, gospel and blues especially, came freedom's music, freedom songs,
Yep.
and they were powerful. And they, if you sat in the atrium in the Gallery 3 in the Civil Rights Museum, you could experience the power of that music that, ain't gonna let nobody put me down and all like that. And we shall overcome. And so the Chitlin Circuit was, there were clubs in all the southern cities that would attract real stars, Sam Cooke and
Right.
James
Wow.
Brown and people like that,
Yep.
who were really good. They wouldn't come to like Jackson and play in a white club,
Yeah.
but they would come to, and they weren't invited,
Yeah.
but they would come to Stephen Tro's room. And I do think that if everybody had to listen to good music every day,
Yep.
we'd have world peace.
Absolutely.
From Jackson, we head south on Route 55 to Louisiana. We stop along the way to visit the bayou before reaching New Orleans. Famous for its round-the-clock nightlife, vibrant live music scene, and unique cuisine that reflects its history as a melting pot of French, African, and American cultures. Wanted to hear firsthand what it was like to be a professional musician in New Orleans. Having seen him perform with his Delta Funk band on Frenchman Street on our first night, we spoke with John Lacey at his home in NOLA.
All right.
John, it's a great pleasure to meet you.
Hello,
I'm
Ian.
And we got George and Steve.
What's this, George?
We're just three middle-aged men on a musical journey down through the southern states. And we're trying to make a travel vlog as we go along and talk to some interesting people. So we couldn't find any interesting people, so we thought we'd talk to you.
All right.
So basically all is just to ask you a few questions about, for example, how did you, I believe you're from New Jersey.
New Jersey,
So, so how did you end up down in New Orleans?
Well, it was a long journey from New Jersey down to Florida, which is out to California, which was great.
Yeah.
And then when I was in California, I was with a band, and we were playing through here. And I was in my teens at that time. And I thought you mentioned being middle-aged.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, if I don't make it in Los Angeles, by the age of 30, I'm moving down to New Orleans.
Yep.
I'm going to play loud blues guitar, drink a lot of beer, and just retire. Well, it panned out that way. I got here right around 29 years old, 30, figuring, well, I'll just play loud blues guitar and no more work for me.
Yeah.
And I haven't done any work other than playing loud blues guitar.
Ting, you play for a 3 hour set.
And that'd be a slow night, a 3 hour.
Really?
Yeah, sometimes we'll do 4 or 5, and it's okay once you get started. You're there. No, my voice thankfully stays in the game. I don't, unlike what we're doing now this time of day, I don't speak all day long.
All day long.
Like, in fact, when we first started communicating, I said, just please text me. So unless I'm talking to my kids or someone that
specifically
really
to
needs
save the vocal cords.
So then by showtime I'm ready and
So if you don't mind me, and don't worry, we're not from the IRS. But how does it work? Do you get paid for a gig, or are you solely reliant on tips on the night?
It varies. So there's a lot of gigs where there's legitimate paper trails.
That's good.
And they usually pay really well.
Yeah.
Enough to report.
That's
right. You have it is a business. You
have to pay bills.
Right.
Yeah.
So unless you're a street musician, who are fabulous. This is not disparaging street musicians.
Yeah.
Right. That's all unreported, right? So anything that we get is tips, unreported.
Yeah.
We get a lot of times a percentage of what people drink.
Yeah.
Hence the reason we have such a deep well of drinking songs that we've written.
Okay, right.
And we love playing them because, sometimes you're just an alcohol salesperson.
We attended a performance at the New Orleans Jazz Museum, exploring the history of African drumming and its lasting impact on the music and culture of New Orleans. Performers included Peter Boutet and Reuben Watts.
And he said love is the answer to many questions, And I said, what about war? And he said love. And what about hunger? He said love. And what about the people living on the street, And what about the children with no food to eat? And he said, if you love your brother, would you want to do him harm? And if you love your sister, would you let her children starve? No way. And if you love your brothers and your sisters, would you let them sleep out in the cold, sleep out in the rain? When you're warm in your home, no way, no way, no way. Bye-bye.
From New Orleans, we head northwest to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, another city on the Mississippi River with a great musical heritage. We are shown round by an old friend, Jack Moore, who we had first met at the King Biscuits Blues Festival in Arkansas. Jack took us out of the city to occasion jam and barbecue at the Bayou Teche Brewery. And then we spoke to him about his unique introduction to the blues.
Jack, lovely to see you again, Jack.
My pleasure.
As you know, it's George, Steve and I are just over here on a 3-week tour of the southern states. We're big blues fans, as we know, and we met at the King Biscuit Blues Festival in Arkansas a couple of years ago. So we just wanted to have a chat with some interesting people along the way for our little video blog. And you're particularly interesting because you have an encyclopedic knowledge of the blues, especially Louisiana blues. So would you mind just telling us how it all came about from growing up and being born and bred in Louisiana?
Not at all. It's great to have y'all back. Welcome to South Louisiana and happy Mardi Gras. My dad's father ran some cattle. He was a really diverse, interesting man. He was a barber. He had the town barber shop, but it was a little bitty town, so they were only open 3 days a week. And then he raised cattle and he raised some different crops. And then this was on some property about 15 miles outside of the little bitty town, so we're talking even deeper into rural Alabama. And he had a little store, which could only be loosely described as a store. He sold a few loaves of bread, some jars of sausages and peanut butter. The real reason for having the store was these two black guys that worked for him made moonshine whiskey and homemade wine, and that was sold under the counter. One of these guys, whose name was Honey Pie Edwards, I never knew his real name.
Okay.
The other one was Boo.
Good blues name.
And they lived on adjacent little pieces of land to my grandfather's. And one of Honey Pie's wife was the first cousin of Muddy Waters. So Muddy Waters would come through there 2 or 3 times a year when he was playing the juke joints on the Chitlin circuit.
Right.
And back in those days, we're talking 40s, 50s, 60s, they couldn't stay in the hotels because it was too deeply entrenched in racism then.
Oh, that was because
they would have to find a place to stay. Well, that was a natural because he had family there. So, as I said, 2 or 3 times a year, they would stay there at Honey Pie's house, and then during the day, they would come over and hang out at the little store, especially if it was wintertime because they had a big potbelly stove and they had a jukebox. And on the weekends, it was a juke joint.
Right.
And my dad and I would camp. We would camp out on the property about a quarter of a mile behind the store. So on Friday and Saturday and Sunday nights, we could literally lay around our campfire and hear Muddy Waters singing.
Wow.
And if they didn't have a band, we could hear the jukebox.
Yep.
Well, I guess the first time I met Muddy Waters, I think I was about 9 or 10 years old. And I already knew Slim Harpo because he came in my uncle's gas station on Gummer Street, right across from Phil Brady's. And my uncle was pretty progressive for the times because he actually gave Slim Harpo a account to charge his gas there because Slim at this time was not full-time in the music business. He had 2 or 3 trucks and he hauled scrap metal. So I
was
would
that because he couldn't make money out of music?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would see Slim Harpo typically 3 or 4 times a week at my uncle's gas station. So I think I was about 9 years old when one day I walked in the little store because my folks were going off to do something. It was like our daycare center. And Boo goes, "Oh, I'm glad you came by." He goes, "You know that guy's records that you like to play on the jukebox, Muddy Waters?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I want you to meet him. This is him right here." So he walked over and he introduced me to him, Wow. And,
Marvelous.
I mean, I was just astounded to meet somebody that played on a jukebox,
Of course.
And so he goes, "So you like my records, homeboy?" I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Although I do have to say, I like the way Slim Harpo does his song, 'I'm a King Bee,' a little better than you do." And his jaw kind of dropped, and then he just busted out laughing. He goes, "Boo, you hear what this little motherfucker just said?" So I have the distinction of the first time I was called a motherfucker, pardon my French, it was by Muddy Waters.
Great story, Jack. What a great. Now, you mentioned Slim Harpo there, and I think you said to us earlier on that I didn't know this, but the Rolling Stones, did 3 covers of Slim Harpo songs on the first album.
They did,
and this was one of the things that fascinated us when we came on this trip, that black musicians couldn't get their music played on essentially white American radio.
Except on the black radio
And it
stations.
took a bunch of white middle-class guys from England, like the Stones, to come over here, take their music, cover it, as they've obviously done. Could you just tell us a little bit about
which
Slim
kind of created rock and roll, but they were doing the blues. It was just, that was the way it sounded, way they did it.
Yeah.
That was actually lesson number 2 of Moe's Whispering Smith with, it's all the blues, baby.
Yeah.
So yes, I know it was Shake Your Hips, I'm a King Bee, and I, for the life of me, can't remember what the other one was, but the Stones were huge Slim Harpo fans. And so right after this album came out, one day another local Baton Rouge blues musician, John Fred, of John Fred and the Playboys, his last name was Gourier, local French name. And John Fred had a #1 hit back in the late 60s, Judy in Disguise. And one day John Fred was coming out of the bank, and Slim Harpo was coming in, and he stopped John Fred, they were good buddies, and said, "John, do you know who the Rolling Stones are?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, I do." He goes, "They're a band in England, and they love your music." And he goes, "Look," and Slim Harpo held up a check for $25,000. And he goes, "I just got this in the mail from the Rolling Stones yesterday." And he goes, "I'm going in the bank to see if it's actually good." And the next day, Slim came by the gas station driving a brand new Cadillac.
Lovely. What a lovely story. We talked about the Stones, Jack, but you also told us a really interesting story about the Beatles when they came here. Now, I wasn't aware that they were influenced by black blues music. I knew the Stones were, but I wasn't sure that the Beatles were. Could you just tell us that?
Absolutely,
about
yeah.
the Beatles?
Just like the Stones and the Kinks and the Animals and a lot of other guys and a lot of people, the Moody Blues.
Yeah.
The Moody Blues named their band after an instrumental Slim Harpo song.
Really?
Moody Blues.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And the Beatles were huge fans of the American blues musicians. And the very first time they came to America, which I think was 1964, when they got off the plane in New York, forgive me, I forget the name of the prominent media personality that was meeting them to do their very first American interview. And he literally didn't even let them get down off the ramp from the airplane. He met them about halfway up and started the interview. And I think it was the second or third question he asked him. He goes, "Well, what is it that y'all most want to do while you're here in America?" And John said, "Oh, well, we would very much love to meet your Misters Slim Harpo and Bo Diddley." And the media guy goes, "Oh, well, that's great." And then he literally does a double take and goes, "Wait a minute, who?" Because he had no idea who John was talking about. He goes, well, we'll work on that.
We talked to another musician in Nashville called John Bird, who plays essentially classic American country music and folk music. But he came up with an interesting point. He said he doesn't really make any money playing in the US. He only makes money when he goes on tour in Europe.
It's true.
And he's played
today. It's still true.
Is that similar for blues musicians here?
Very much so. And I'll call a spade. It's racism. Even today, blues music is still looked upon as black music.
Yeah.
And there's a big part of the white community that.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't like it. I've had to explain to people over the years that a lot of the songs that especially when I was younger, back in the 60s and 70s, I can't tell you how many conversations I would have with people. Well, that song you like by the Rolling Stones, Time Is on My Side. Again, the cycle of life, just like Mose explained to me about Hound Dog, I would explain to them, that's an Irma Thomas song. There's a New Orleans singer that the Rolling Stones loved, and the song the Animals are doing or the Kinks are doing, it's Slim Harpo's song or some other great blues musician guy that's just the way it sounds when they play it. It came out as rock and roll, but it's a blues song.
And I think there was another interesting piece on that you mentioned that I think of Mose Whispering Smith. He went to play in Europe. He was treated with the utmost respect, well-paying gigs. Yet when he came back to the US, he came back to a segregated society.
That was an ongoing struggle for those guys because when they went to Europe, the racism factor didn't exist.
No.
They were just this phenomenal artist who was treated accordingly.
Yeah.
And a lot of them struggled with it. Mose did, became an alcoholic because, it was just, he'd go over there and his world would just improve 1,000%. And then he would come back and then like he would tell me, I have to go around to the back of the gas station to your uncle's colored restroom instead of use the same one that everybody else does.
On leaving Baton Rouge, we head west into Texas. The atmosphere changes and cowboy hats and boots appear as we traverse America's second largest state. We are heading for Austin, the live music capital of the world. Austin, we caught up with Laura, tour director at Tipster Walking Tours, and then Ian and George met Stevie Ray Vaughan in the park.
Laura, it's been lovely to meet you.
Great to meet you.
We just met today. We've come on the Tipster Tours Walking Tour of Austin. So you're obviously, apart from being an exceptionally good tour guide, you're obviously also a musician as well. So how have you seen the music scene change in Austin over the last few years?
Great question. So I've been here in town for about 6.5 years now. And well, one of the biggest changes that I would say is that, of course, it's gotten more expensive to live here, so musicians are struggling a bit more. But in spite of that, it's really still maintained its vibrancy and its eclecticism. And one of the things that I love the most about our Austin scene is that, we talked about these iconic venues from the 60s and 70s, the Vulcan Gas Company, the Armadillo World headquarters, and how they were really these creative communities of all different kinds of artists hanging out, collaborating together, and sort of spawning new sounds of music that hadn't really been heard here in Austin or in some cases anywhere before. And I think those are things that have stayed actually pretty consistent about the music scene, even from those days, that, we don't have a lot of the industry presence here that, say, Nashville has, the songwriting publishing companies and the offices for big record labels. We don't really have that. So
that's
more about
surprising for a music town like
It is. But I think the great thing about that is that the scene here is still so sort of about that DIY ethos.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very community driven, and you don't have necessarily a lot of particular styles,
yeah.
but you have a lot of bands that are still sort of combining these strange,
Right.
diverse influences and pioneering new sounds.
And one of the highlights today was, for me anyway, was going to see Antone's. What an iconic venue.
Yeah.
What's your favourite venue in Austin?
That's a tricky question, of course. Antone's is
There are
fantastic.
so many, aren't there?
There are so many good ones.
How many is it?
To about 250 these days, yeah. So one of my favorites absolutely is Cheer Up Charlie's that we went by on Red River Street.
You showed us that, yeah.
They've been open for almost 10 years now in a couple different locations, but really just amazing bookers of local bands.
And is
as
that
I
mainly
mentioned.
blues bands or rock
No.
bands?
A
or
lot of
indie
the
rock?
sort of, indie alternative, pop and rock and electronic and weird things going on.
Well, Ian, here we are in sunny Austin, a lovely park here. We've got animals, we've got joggers, we've got Jehovah's Witnesses, and here we have...
It does.
And here we have a statue of Stevie
Ray Vaughan. It's,
So what do you think? What's your first impressions?
well, Austin, what a lovely, beautiful city.
Yeah.
Great music city with lots of tradition. And it's a great pleasure to be stood here beside this statue, George. Unfortunately, I never had the pleasure of seeing the great man himself. Came to his music late in life. But I've seen his brother play several times. But it's a great pleasure to be here and just to stand beside this beautiful statue.
Yes.
And what a beautiful setting as well.
Oh, it's lovely, yeah.
The skyline and the river, and it's just it's quite idyllic.
Yes. So when did you find out about Stevie Ray?
Well, I came to his music late in life, and it was in fact, it was probably after he died, and started getting more and more into the blues, and then realised what an iconic Texas blues man he was. There's not a finer instrumental than Scuttlebuttin', which is a classic track.
Yeah.
And I've heard many artists play it, but unfortunately not Stevie Ray.
Right.
But,
The trip is coming to an end and we're heading back to Nashville. We have one last stop along the way. We catch up with Jack and Elan Holdsworth, old friends and musicians whose band, the Birthright Blues Project, regularly performs locally in the Sulphur Springs area of Texas and annually at the King Biscuits Blues Festival.
Said my sweet little woman, yeah, she left me for the day. Yeah. Said my sweet, sweet woman, yeah, you know she left me today. Yeah. But that's alright, y'all. You know I don't need her no way. Yeah, no, not today.
So Jack, we met at the King Biscuit, and we've been trying to kind of relive our musical journey. And George, Steve, and I are on a middle-aged man music trip. We're trying to talk to some interesting
Awesome.
people, old friends and new friends. So we kind of met at the King Biscuit. So we started off in Nashville, and we had 5 days in Nashville. So have you ever played Nashville yourself?
I've never played Nashville,
Right.
but when we were in Birthright, a friend of ours, Sammy Joe Jackson, who is just a fabulous singer.
Okay.
But that's all he's got. He
Right.
don't know. He needs somebody to gather him up and say, hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it fits in here. And anyhow, he comes up with all these lines, and he wrote this song called "Gambling in Mississippi," and we put the music to it and tweaked it, and we was all in agreement on it. And I thought it was one of them shuffles.
Okay.
It was a shuffle, and hey, how can you go wrong?
Yeah.
Right? And so I pitched it to the Paramount Group in Nashville.
Right.
And like 3 days went by, and bam, they hit us up on email.
Wow.
And they want, they just love it.
Yeah.
That's basically what they say. We just love it. And you need to be here in Nashville, it was in the mid-February of that year. And I'm thinking, and
this was a long time ago, and we didn't make it hardly any money, and we had babies, and all this stuff. Made pop tires on the vehicle, and we need to be in Nashville in mid-February. And I'm thinking, you people have lost your minds. It's going to be snow on the ground, only vehicle family has. Anyhow, long story short, I was really excited about it. So I contacted them and talked to this gal, whatever her name was. And what it boiled down to is that they liked that song and the songwriting ability of that song so much that they wanted me to pay them $2,800 to go to a songwriting seminar and get coached. And I thought, well, kiss my ass.
Absolutely, 100% right.
So I wrote a song, which it's not a piano song, it's a guitar song. And I don't want to go to Nashville.
Yep.
And it's just, it talks about how I don't want to go to Nashville with all them other folks, drinking beer and talking, laughing at stupid jokes, blah, blah, blah. I'll just go on to Austin where the people keep it real.
Okay.
And that's where I'll have most of my beer, basically, is how it went,
Yep, great.
But yeah, I was flabbergasted about that, $2,800. I come learn how to write songs. And
that's showbiz.
Evidently.
We arrived back in Nashville after our 2,000-mile road trip. We reflect that we have had a great time learning more about the music we love. However, America always seems to pose more questions than answers. Ever fascinating, it seems best summed up in verse. Oh, America, big, brash, brilliant, fake, fun, furious, melting, money, mighty, dream, drunk, drive. Oh, America, music, muscle, mission, church, choirs, cars, freedom, family, finance, hopeful, helpful, hellish. Oh, America, stars, stripes, sex, road, river, riot, race, rights, wrongs, USA, 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 USA.
Yeah, they call me breeze. I keep rolling down the road. There you go, son. Yeah, they call me the breeze. I keep rolling down the road. I might go to California. I might go to Georgia. I don't know. Yeah, they call me the breeze.
Walking through the road of life, so full of trouble. Met a friend of mine who said he had the answer, yeah. So I stopped for a while.